Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I'm Dalton Gentry, and we are here with Friday's episode of How to Read Books Good. How to Read Books Good, a breakdown and analysis of how to read literature like a professor by Thomas C. Foster. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different than our previous episodes because we are at a little bit of a different chapter. For the past 10 episodes, we have discussed basically clues in your writing. Things that you might be able to pick out, things that you might be able to find while you're reading that may lead you to further discussion. It may give you a little bit more insight as to what the author was trying to accomplish. We compared how everything may come back to religion, how everything may come back to Shakespeare, the symbolism of the weather, a lot of different things that are going on while we're reading that we, might not be thinking about, but we definitely should be thinking about if we're reading more critically and reading basically to analyze the text rather than just to absorb and enjoy the text. So this is going to be on technically chapter 11. However, this is not numbered in this book because it is the interlude. Does he mean that? So we have established 10 different chapters, 10 different things that we could look at for further analysis, further questions that we may develop while we're reading. And we're going to take a minute here to talk about something that a lot of people often question on Strip Cover Lit. A lot of people in our comments say, well, you're reading too far into the text. The author clearly didn't mean that. You're taking this out of context. You're reading too far. You're bringing things in that aren't relevant. However, 95% of the time, I'm going to disagree. These things are relevant. These things are something that should be analyzed because you cannot just take the text itself and say, this is it, there's nothing more to it. There is always something more to it. That is why we have the idea of symbolism. That is why we have the different bits of Shakespeare and religion coming into play in the text, because these are things that are going to be prominent in the author's mind. When reading, we must question whether all of these clues that we've discussed are intentional. So I have a bit of a quote here from page 92. One of the surest ways to be successful in the theater in the 19th century was to take a touring Shakespeare company through the American West. If folks in their little houses on the prairie could quote the bard, it is likely their writers accidentally wrote stories that paralleled his. So this here, we're looking at things that people take into account, popular items. Clearly, Shakespeare has always been a popular item for discussion, and if Shakespeare is popular, it clearly leads to believe that people are going to be like, well, maybe I'll just spice my story up with a little bit of Shakespeare. Some Shakespearean elements, maybe some throwbacks, some text people aren't very familiar with. And as that grows and develops, it gets buried into the writing a little bit. It's going to be in the first draft. It's very prominent. Maybe we're going to cover it up a little bit. So much so where these things become maybe just a small little symbol, a small little tidbit that might make something in the back of the mind there fire off and lead you to a little bit more of what the text is saying that is not actually printed word. Now, from page 93 as well, the writing process is something that doesn't get discussed a lot. It's very difficult to talk about someone's writing process because everybody's writing process is very different. And to be honest, nobody really cares. They just want the produced work. They don't want to see, know how you got here. But the writing process does take time. That is something I don't think anyone could argue. And as time develops into thought, the things that you're reading may have taken, 5 minutes to read. It could have taken 5 months for the author to write. There are always things that are going to be going on that are going to be influencing the author. They're going to be thinking things over. They're going to be mulling, what can I draw from this? Ideas will develop over time and become more thorough and more concrete. So, from page 93... the few pages of this chapter I have taken you in a few minutes to read. The few pages of this chapter have taken you a few minutes to read. They have taken me, I'm sorry to say, days and days to write. No, I haven't been sitting at the computer the whole time. First, I carried the germ around for a while, mulling over how best to approach it, and then I sat down and knocked out a few items onto the screen. Then I began fleshing out the argument. Then I got stuck, so I made lunch or baked some bread or helped my kid work on his car, but I carried the problem of the chapter around with me the whole time. That's key right there. I sat down at the keyboard again to write and started in again, but then I got distracted and worked on something else. Eventually, I got to where we are now. Even assuming equal levels of knowledge about the subject, who probably has had the most ideas, you in 5 minutes of reading, or me in 5 days of stumbling around, all I'm really saying is that we readers sometimes forget how long the literary composition can take, and how much very lateral thinking can go on in that amount of time. So, in the days it took him to write this paragraph, which took us no time at all to read, clearly a lot of things have happened. And that is the writer's process in a nutshell. Joyce Carol Oates, one of the most prolific authors, I think, of our modern time, still writes longhand, pen and paper. But she's always developing the ideas, and that's something I found very fascinating when I read a little bit about Joyce. She says, she basically just carries the story around with her, and she's constantly mulling it over. When she's walking the dogs, she's writing. When she's cooking dinner, she's writing. It's all a mental activity, and she's developing these ideas. This idea of lateral thinking as to how we can further layer this parfait of literature with new things. Now, also from page 93, and a bit of continuation here from what we just talked about, lateral thinking is what we're really discussing, the way writers can keep their eye on the target, whether it be plot of the play or the ending of the novel or the argument of the poem, and at the same time bring in a great deal of at least tangible related material. I used to think it was this great gift of literary geniuses that they have, but I'm not so sure anymore. I sometimes teach a creative writing course, and my aspiring fiction writers frequently bring in biblical parallels, classical, or Shakespearean allusions, bits of REM songs, fairy tale fragments, anything you can think of. And neither they nor I would claim that anybody in the room is a genius. It's something that starts happening when a reader or a writer and a sheet of paper gets locked in a room together. And it's a great deal of what makes reading the work of my students, of recent graduates of the Iowa Writers Workshop, of Keats and Shelley, interesting and fun. It all, again, comes back to that human element of writing. Lateral thinking is natural. You are constantly going to be adding things into your writing that have influenced you. Things that might just be on your mind that week. They are going to seep their way into your writing. And whether you want to make that incredibly apparent or just leave very, very subtle little clues, that is always going to leave the text open to interpretation by the readers. And that is something we pride ourselves in here on Strip Cover Lit, is the interpretation of a text. Because you could take a single line from an entire novel, pull a little bit from it, identify what the author was going for, and it could change everything. It could give you a hint how the novel is going to end. It could fill out some blank spots, a little bit of confusion that you may have been having. It's a very important practice to get into. Now, can you push that too far? Can you add things into the text that aren't actually there? Well, of course you can. And that's why it comes down to interpretation. This is my interpretation of the reading. This is what my inner thinking has inner thinking. I just got very Southern Midwest, excuse me. It is what my inner thinking has brought to this text. And from that, these combinations here, this is my interpretation. There's nothing wrong with an interpretation. There's nothing right with an interpretation. Hopefully we're picking up on things that maybe people haven't seen before. Hopefully we're picking up on things that the author intended, whether intentionally or not intentionally, to add into the text that kind of gives a new light to the overall reading itself. So, little bit of a strange episode, not as long as normal here, but this seems to be the interlude, where Foster did take a bit of a moment here to basically say, here's everything I've given you. I've given you 10 different ideas to play with here. Do they actually work? And yes, absolutely they work. So, if you like this kind of thing, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. Give this video a like as well. We always do appreciate it. And if you'd like to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit and have the opportunity to read a little bit of Adrian and myself, our personal writings, poems, essays, a little bit of creative nonfiction, there's a link, as always, to our Patreon to be found in the description below.